this video is coming to us from Omaha 16. Now, Omaha 16, guys, he's a content creator. I've reacted to a couple of his videos up to this point in time. This one, in particular, is why no Gears game will ever top Gears of War 2. And I thought that this was kind of interesting. I wanted to, like I said, I want to talk about this one. Obviously, I have been on record saying that Gears of War 2, in my opinion, is the second greatest Gears of War title ever made, behind Gears of War 3. Gears of War 3, in my opinion, is the greatest Gears ever made. It's the greatest game ever made. I thought that just overall as a full package, unbelievable. But Gears of War 2 is a very close second, at least in my book. And I can see why some people like Gears of War 2 more than Gears of War 3. But that's at least how I look at it. And it's always good to hear other people's opinions about these things.
Since the release of Gears of War in 2006, the franchise has become one of the most played and best-selling game franchises in the gaming industry, spawning sequels, more installments, as well as a comic book series and novels. The first Gears of War game at the time was revolutionary, especially for the shooter genre for games. The game presented a very strong emphasis on cover-based combat gameplay in which players can use objects to avoid attacks such as gunfire and safely engage enemies, both tactical strategies which could be used against AI and player versus player multiplayer. But the one aspect about Gears of War games that made the franchise so memorable was its grim tone, and the series' first sequel, Gears of War 2, carried over that aspect of its predecessor and not only built on it, but escalated it even further, something that most game sequels rarely do. Gears of War 2 was a sequel that not only upgraded and outshined the first Gears of War, and arguably the other installments that came after it, but took the series into a world that was not only serious and dark, but very real, and would become one of the greatest video game sequels of all time.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So before we really even dive into this, I want to say, even though Gears of War 2 is second on my list of greatest Gears of War titles ever made, very closely behind Gears of War 3, I will say this. Coming off of Gears of War 1, obviously, I mean, when we think about that title, I mean, that was the very first game I ever owned on the Xbox 360. When I purchased the Xbox 360, Gears of War came with it. And so I played this game, absolutely, I mean, fell in love with the title. And then when Gears of War 2 came out, it was unbelievable how much of an upgrade Gears of War 2 felt from Gears of War 1, just from a multitude of different perspectives, but from a story perspective, unbelievable. I couldn't believe just everything that you did in Gears of War 2, how the epic moments just, it took Gears of War 1 and basically put it on steroids. I mean, just in a massive, massive way. I even felt, though, with Gears of War 3, it even eclipsed that. Now, I will say Gears of War 2 did have some more epic moments, more epic set pieces than Gears of War 3. But it was like the full package for me that made Gears of War 3 the greatest ever, of just everything from campaign, multiplayer, co-op, all of those things. It was the full package for me that I believe made Gears of War 3 the best ever. But I can see why a lot of people think Gears of War 2 was the best.
Most say that Gears of War 2 was just like any other sequel, similar to a sequel to a blockbuster movie. It took the best qualities from its predecessor and exaggerated on it. Gears of War 2 is no exception to this, but what separates it from other game sequels was its seriousness to go even deeper into what made the first game so great. And I'm not just talking about the gameplay specifically. Obviously, newer installments to games improve and add new features to keep players engaged, have fun, and learn something to keep the games fresh over time. Gears of War 2 kept all of what was done in the first game with the addition of some new aspects. But Gears of War 2 added another layer of quality that the other Gears of War games in the series have not been able to repeat. True skill. In regard to veterans and versus players in Gears of War multiplayer, Gears of War 2 was the first and last Gears of War game that had true skill ranking system, maps, campaign, and big multiplayer. Gears of War 2's multiplayer ranking system was very hard to play and master, where players had to have the abilities to adapt to certain absolute reality situations while playing, instead of the current trend in Gears games today, which rely on connection, game error, validation, location, and illegitimate actions. Gears of War 2, the playing field and all parties in the level of competition were equal, and it all came down to games of split seconds, inches, and player intelligence. To add, players of Gears 2 had to evolve and push themselves to great efforts to become better, succeed, and win.
Okay, so when we talk about true skill, I cannot say how much I disagree with that sentiment. I'm not saying that Gears of War 2 was a game that didn't take any skill. It definitely took skill. But in my mind, I felt like Gears of War 3 absolutely was, I thought it eclipsed Gears of War 2 from a skill perspective. Now, I will say this, Gears of War 3 became more, they wanted to open it up to a lot of other, new players could come in. So it was a game in my mind that was, easy to play, but very hard to master. And I even feel like this with Gears of War 4 and Gears 5. I think that, it's hard to say that, now it's, much easier game. Like there's not much skill involved in these Gears of War titles that are more modern, because Gears of War 4, I will say this, I don't know how much, other people watch Gears Esports, but I've watched Gears Esports. I mean, when we talk about going all the way back to when guys were playing on Gears of War 2, and we're playing this at a very high level, and we've seen how it's evolved. In my mind, Gears of War 4 was like the greatest I've ever seen when it came to Gears Esports. From pure competition, storylines, narratives, I absolutely think Gears of War 4 was unbelievable from that perspective. And I thought that it was definitely a game that was easy to play, but very hard to master at the highest level. And I think that even, if you want to talk about wall bouncing, you want to talk about all these different, techniques and things of that nature that players have now, if you want to call that something that, isn't good for Gears of War, or you feel like it doesn't really show pure skill and things of that nature, I mean, I totally disagree with that notion. I will say that Gears of War 2 did take, I feel like it did take a lot of skill. But I think that there's other titles that definitely took more skill or equal to as much skill as Gears of War 2.
Gears of War 2's world was very grim from start to finish. It was a game that kept players hoping good things would happen but never did. In other words, Gears of War 2 didn't allow players to defeat the evil and escape the darkness happening in the world of the game, but instead continued to sink the player lower and lower into it. The first act of the game opens up with a big level of uncertainty. Players are thrown into a world with protagonists that have little hope of succeeding, which is winning a war against a monstrous and very ruthless enemy. There are bright moments throughout the game's story, but the events mostly end with great sorrow and loss. Gears of War 2 was a game about warfare and what warfare truly is, and the game's narrative gave players no breathing room to escape from it from beginning to end. The lead developers of the game wanted to add a great depth of seriousness to Gears of War 2. Unlike the first one, which was a dark, gothic, chilling shoot-'em-up with good spectacle, Cliff Bleszinski, one of the founding fathers of Gears of War, while working on Gears of War 2 back in 2008 in an interview with Joystick stated, "I wanted it to feel like more of a war. And it's not just about having the big battle scenes with the hundreds of locusts. It's not just about the huge beautiful vistas that the player gets to see, or the tank shooting the Brumok down in front of you, or the choppers crashing. It's all about the writing and the levels. Going into the Hollow and hearing the other radio chatter from other people who are dropping into the underground, and they're lost, and it's foreshadowing what players are going to encounter later in the underground. It's everything to give more of a sense not only of the scale, but also what's at stake for humanity. And this direction stays extremely consistent throughout Gears of War 2's narrative."
I definitely agree with what Omaha is talking about here. I think that Gears of War 2 had some unbelievable, not only moments from like an epic perspective, but it was a dark title that was gritty, grounded, really got that you really did feel like really what war was all about. And I think they did a perfect job, that being Epic Games, of capturing that for all of us, for sure. Like I said, I can't, there's no way I can disagree with what he's saying about that. I think that Gears of War 2 definitely captured the essence of the warfare of Gears of War as a whole. It was very dark, it was very gritty, and I know there's a lot of people that want us to go back to that same kind of grittiness in Gears of War 6. I think there's a very good chance that that very well could happen, especially if Kate Diaz ends up becoming the Swarm Queen, which is something that I've been talking about in terms of Gears of War 6 theories. I think it would be very interesting to see a dark take on us playing the character that's going to turn into the new Locust Queen. I think it's a very interesting twist of in turn of events that it could shake the entire Gears of War franchise to its core. And I just think that Gears of War 6 could be the Gears of War 2, but from the Coalition. Even though Gears of War 4, you could consider it to maybe be, somewhat the Gears of War 2. I kind of felt like Gears of War 4 was more Gears of War 1. And then Gears 5 was more Gears of War 3. And Gears 6, could that be more Gears of War 2? We'll have to kind of wait and see.
While other game series have taken similar narrative directions, they tend to always lose themselves along the way in adding that exciting wow factor to keep players entertained. Gears of War 2's narrative doesn't do any of that, and when the spectacles do happen, you don't always feel that vibe of excitement, but instead feel a level of uncertainty and anxiety. Although there are a good amount of exciting moments in Gears of War 2, most of them are short-lived. Gears 2 was a very immersive game delivering a chilling, suspenseful, epic, unsettling revelation story that kept players involved from the start to finish. For a game that started out introducing us to characters that were simply just soldiers fighting a war against monsters, every dynamic in Gears 2 is so well developed, and all the voice actors have such great chemistry, it never feels like you're playing a typical third-person shooting game killing bad guys with cool characters.
You seem to have that effect on people.
You feel like you're playing a video game with real people. Real people with actual flaws and real feelings for each other. Delivering masterclass voice acting with a lot of real dialogue and much improv from the voice cast that all pulls at the heartstrings, making even one of the most badass characters in video gaming lore heavy-hearted. I was personally in disbelief that despite all the awesome, epic, fun proportions that Gears 2 had to offer, we got a whole entire epic campaign mainly about just two friends. A whole compelling story about a very cold, gruff, aggressive, professional soldier and a very sincere, wholehearted comrade. It was a game all about story, tension, and character.
This is everything we've been fighting for.
Yeah? Well, Maria's everything I've been fighting for. She's my fucking wife, alright?
So you gonna turn your back on your whole world then? The other Gears we fought with? All the people who've died?
I'm sorry, Marcus. After what you did for your father, I thought you'd understand.
And speaking of character, Gears 2 has the best characters and development out of all the games in the series. There is a saying in the art and work of screenwriting, a really good script never goes out of style. You have to have strong character work for a story to really have an impact. Characters are everything in video games, and that reason is why Gears of War 2 was so perfect. We spend a lot of quality time with them, seeing how they interact, gaining an understanding of what is at stake, their objectives, all subconsciously develops later sequences throughout the game's story to be much more effective. Some of the characters in Gears 2 are stereotypes, but they are all given just enough humanity at the right times for us to care and not making them all one-dimensional. Such as characters Ty Kaliso and Dizzy Wallen's short and small developments from just soldiers serving in the COG army to likable heroes. And Benjamin Carmine being the young, inexperienced, panicked, goofy kid soldier slowly but surely coming into his own.
Okay, so I wanted to talk, but really, like, kind of quick side here. I think having a spin-off sequel or a spin-off, I guess you would say prequel, about Ty, I think would be awesome. I would love to learn more about him as a character. I thought he was absolutely awesome. I would have absolutely loved to see more about him. I think that would have been absolutely awesome for sure. But in terms of characters, I said this earlier in the show, guys, and I'm going to say it again. Look, a lot of people have not given the new characters time to develop. I agree. I love the older characters as well. I think that from the very jump, they were just really hardcore, characters. But we also allowed those characters to develop. I think we need to allow Kate Diaz, JD, Del, all these different characters to develop. Now, the Coalition's made some very, different kind of decisions, and I would say probably decisions that aren't that great in terms of when we look at from the perspective of having to choose whether you kill JD or Del. And JD we played as in Gears of War 4, and then Gears 5, he's like a douchebag. You move on from JD to Kate Diaz. There's just a number of things that we kind of felt off about that transition. But nonetheless, I will say that we as the community have not given these new characters enough time to develop as of yet.
The tension in Gears 2 is also fantastic. When players enter into the Hollow for the first time all the way to the Locust Stronghold, we know things are going to happen, but we don't know how. When the characters have to hijack an enemy boat to get to their destination, knowing they have to go through multiple enemy forces only to find out that there are other dangerous threats they have to go through than just the Locusts themselves. Our heroes discovering over time that there is more than meets the eye to their enemy. The threat the characters are up against could be more dangerous than they imagined. And I've gone without mentioning one of the final qualities that wraps everything all up that make Gears of War 2 into a masterpiece: the score. Steve Jablonsky's score elevated Gears 2 to something very grand, operatic, as well as intense, and it supports all the action, dialogue, and menace of the game beautifully. Was Gears of War 2 a perfect game? No. But in regard to the series as a whole, this was as perfect of a Gears of War game as you can get. I personally adored the realism and true skill of Gears of War 2, and how the entire story campaign was all character driven. Once again, I have to say, the meta for gameplay and features in Gears of War will inevitably change for the better or worse over time, and I am not disputing any of that. Gears of War 2 may be a relic of the past in the game series, but the game's quality is much superior than all of its aftercomers. Gears of War 2 was a masterpiece that defined the Gears of War franchise, and a masterpiece that very likely, arguably, will never, ever be topped.
First of all, guys, if you guys haven't checked out Omaha 16, you guys should check him out. Link will be in the description down below. Look, Gears of War 2... like I said, second greatest Gears title, in my personal opinion, behind Gears of War 3. The Brothers to the End motto, all of those things, Gears of War 3, all the build-up, all of it, the full package you got from Gears of War 3, that's why I put it at number 1. But it's like a 1A to 1B. Gears of War 2 was incredible, guys. I mean, you can't take anything, you can't take it away from what they were able to accomplish, that being Epic Games, with just eclipsing what they did in Gears of War 1 to Gears of War 2. Unbelievable. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely incredible. But that last thing that he said, where he thinks that there's a good chance, I'm kind of, just kind of summarizing here. I'm not going word for what he said, but he's saying essentially that doesn't really think that anything's going to top Gears of War 2 in terms of from the Gears of War franchise. And I disagree. And I said this earlier on the show, but I think that Gears of War 6 has a very good chance at being the greatest game that the Coalition has ever made, and the possibility of being one of the greatest Gears of War titles ever made. And the reason being is because of the time now that we have between Gears 5 to Gears 6. the Coalition and Microsoft, this is the longest that we've ever had to wait for a new Gears of War title. And I think that gives us a really good opportunity, and more so the Coalition and Microsoft, time to figure out what they did right, what they did wrong, and what they can do better moving forward in the next title. And so, in my mind, I think that I disagree with the notion that Gears of War 2 and Gears of War 3 are going to stay the greatest Gears of War titles ever, because that means that the rest of the Gears of War titles we get for the rest of time are going to be mediocre. And for me, I want to be optimistic and I want to be excited about that next entry, that it could very well capture that magic we got from those older titles like Gears of War 2 and Gears of War 3. But what do you guys think? Do you think there will be a Gears of War title in the future that tops Gears of War 2, or in my mind, Gears of War 3? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And for more Gears of War content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.